Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where in the world you find yourself. My name is Leon Versfeld. I'm the managing partner of Versfeld and Hugo. I have Dr. Etienne Hugo here with us this evening. He is joining us from Sydney, Australia, and the purpose of this webinar is to educate you a little bit about some options on immigrating to Australia as an option. Etienne, why don't you introduce yourself, give us a little bit of the listeners a little bit of background about yourself.
There we go. Thank you for that, Leon. As an introduction, I can say that originally from South Africa, I migrated to Australia at the end of '99. My wife and I came across, and I guess with the initial plan just to stay for 2 years. Back then, one could get access to citizenship after a 2-year stay on a permanent visa. So that was the plan. And then I guess 25 years later, we're still here and very happy in Sydney. So I started in immigration law because that was the first opportunity that was given to me as a new migrant. And 25 years on, I've become an accredited specialist in this area. It's a very small group of about 50 lawyers in a cohort of about 30,000 lawyers in New South Wales that have this accreditation. So that's our focus. That's what we do, and that's the basis on which I will happily discuss some options with your audience today.
Thank you, Etienne. So just a little bit of background to tie in with what Etienne was saying. We both went to the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He immigrated to Australia, and myself immigrated to the United States, respectively. And we've always kind of compared some notes on how the Australian government is handling immigration versus the US government. And there's quite a lot of comparisons as it relates to the way the frustrations that there are with the bureaucracy in dealing with immigration, and how things can change on a dime. It is always rewarding to know that someone who sits halfway around the world deals with the same frustration sometimes as what we deal with over on this side of the world. And it's also very insightful, oftentimes, to hear about stories that have similar facts and how the Australian legal system, immigration system, kind of handles, some of those issues. And he's very proactive, in my opinion, about trying to get ahead and figure out ways for people to legally immigrate to Australia. The big difference, I think, between Australia and the US is Australia is not a border country to a big country like Mexico or Central America or Canada. So it makes it a little bit difficult if you want to immigrate over there without any lawful purpose, unless you're a strong swimmer. But needless to say, so ons eerste taal is Afrikaans, maar aangesien daar mense is wat nie Afrikaans verstaan nie, sal ons hierdie webinar dan nou natuurlik in Engels hou. But I was just saying we were going to conduct this webinar in English. We're going to discuss three major topics today on options to immigrate to Australia. The first one would be business migration via an employer, very similar to the United States, where you need to find an employer willing to sponsor you, and then there's various different visa categories under which you can come. Etienne, explain to us maybe just in a little bit of detail. We'll go through one after the other. A little bit about what is the most popular visa that people utilize under the business migration via employer.
Yes, so I think it's probably important to mention at the start that currently the business skills visa program is basically dead, which is not great. Historically, we've always had a business skills visa program, and through different governments, they made changes to try and tweak things in a way that they thought was helpful for the country. And the most recent of these attempts were to introduce a provisional business skills visa, which was the 188 visa, and then to set certain goals for you to achieve that would then ultimately result in a permanent visa, 888. The historic business migration options that gave you permanent residence straight away, like the old significant investor visa and the business talent visa, those ones were deleted as options. And under the current government, we've basically had the program on pause for quite some time. So people who already hold the provisional 188 visa, they can still apply for the extension. They can still apply for their permanent stage 888, but it's not open for new candidates who haven't previously held or currently hold a 188 visa. And this is why I understand that many of our audience members will have an interest in potentially a business angle to come to Australia. This is why I suggested we discuss an employer-sponsored model that can very closely align or be aligned with a business owner or entrepreneur that will still achieve the same goal, and that I think will probably achieve that goal a lot quicker compared to the historic business skills program options. Took very long, many years, which is often not
Now,
practical.
when you say very long, is that years for an application to take that it takes, or months, or?
Well, historically, if you talk about the 188, and I think we shouldn't because the program's closed, but that could easily take you 2 years before you got your visa. And then you had a provisional visa for 5 years, allowing you to achieve those goals to then qualify for your permanent visa another 2 or 3 years later if things go well. So it had its problems, and maybe that's the relevance for the discussion this morning, is that it wasn't awesome anyway, so let's not cry about it now.
Yes.
Right? And I think the employer-sponsored option is what we currently have in our hand, so let's look at what's in our hand to use. I can say that the government in December last year, which seems very short time ago, they did introduce the so-called National Innovation Visa, and I suggest that we have a separate discussion on this visa another day, because they introduced it as a concept, and only literally 7 days ago, the New South Wales state government started, and the South Australia government, they both launched their guidelines for what candidates they would consider supporting. So I think it's a very sort of developing space for people who are exceptional in terms of their field, either as entrepreneurs or sports people or otherwise, academia. That sort of will be hand chosen, if you like, for support to apply for this 858 National Innovation Visa. And that could have a context within the business skills cohort as well. But as I said, I think it hasn't yet launched properly. So let's talk about that in a little while rather than this morning or this evening.
Perfect. So if I want to immigrate to Australia and I have a company who wants to sponsor me, obviously the 188 is no longer a thing. How does that company get me over there?
Okay, so there are a number options to consider. But what I'll do is I'll give you the basic structure, and then we can look at a few sort of alternative options to that structure. The employer-sponsored work visa program is designed around the employment relationship, which consists of 3 main parts. You always have an employer, You have a position and you have an employee who will ultimately do the work. And for each of those three building blocks, if you like, there's a separate application to be filed with immigration in Australia. So if you know who the employer is, that employer, whether it be a company or a partnership or a sole trader for that matter, that entity needs to be approved as a sponsor so that it has the ability to nominate people on work visas. The second building block is what's the position, and that requires a nomination application to be filed with government. And in this application, it's all about what is the role. Is it a business development manager, or is it a technical person like a IT or an accounting person? And the third application is then who will do the work. That's the visa application. And in the visa application, you need to show that you've got the right skills and work experience and English language ability and those things to be granted the visa sought. So
how long does it then take for this entire process then to go from start to finish? I mean, I've got a position open, I'm ready to have the guy come and work, and I need to hop through 3 different hoops, it sounds like.
Yeah, it can happen quickly. They can also run parallel.
Okay.
They can run through all 3 at the same time. And it's a very big program. It's a very mainstream visa. And for that reason, processing times are essential because that's how the economy runs. If we need skilled workers, how do we get them here? If there's a job for them to plug into, let's go. It can happen quickly. So we're talking months, not years, right?
Great.
And in this model, if we look at the people in attendance now, some of you would be business owners, for example, or you would be an employee in a bigger organization. So it's possible for an overseas company that's not an Australian PTY Limited or public company for that matter, for an overseas company to be approved as a sponsor as well. And then it's in fact an overseas business sponsor. And then the focus is with that overseas company to say, look, we intend to set up operations in Australia, and for that purpose we need to bring out some key people to the country, and that's why we want to get our overseas company approved as a sponsor so that we have that ability to nominate corporate general managers or business development managers or what have you for that purpose, and then the visas to go along. Most of the applications, that's a relatively small group in terms of applications. Most sponsors are Australian based already, and then you apply for what's called a standard business sponsorship to have the entity be given the capacity to nominate people on work visas.
And when that company, sorry, go ahead.
What you would typically find is that step 1 would be, if it's an overseas based entity that's already got a lot of momentum and what have you, is to have that entity approved as an OBS, to then bring the key people to Australia, to then start operations and start to trade actively and lawfully in the country, to show financial capacity to meet sponsorship obligations, and then to convert that into a standard business sponsorship for the local entity, and then to transfer the visas across. And from then onwards, there are very strong options, not only for the initial 4-year temporary visa, but also for the permanent visa to follow. And there are many access roads to that option.
So just for a company to then get vetted or, to have the ability, is there a minimum amount? Do they need to dictate on what they are going to, how many employees they're planning on bringing over? Or do they just need to say, hey, I'm bringing some people over, managerial executives, maybe a bunch of specialized workers?
Sure. Look, and we can talk about probably the details of it in another forum, but in essence, what you need to show is if it's an overseas entity applying for overseas business sponsorship, you need to show that you have thought it through. It's not just a
Sure.
a thought that came to mind over a nice dinner or something.
Yeah.
But you need to show a proper business plan and have someone help you with that to show very specific projections in terms of what you plan to do, how long time you intend to do it in, and the people that you'll need, and basically what the strategy is for Australia. And then on that basis, it will work.
I gotcha. So over here in the US, we call those intercompany transfers, where, you go from one company to the other, the old Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola, South Africa, setting up shop in Australia. And, they need to bring some marketing guys over. They need to bring the Coca-Cola syrup guy over who knows the recipe and that kind of stuff to make that business flow. It sounds to me like very similar to what you're explaining. And what about the special skilled worker visa? You were mentioning earlier about the business migration by an employer, when an employer is specifically just needing a specific skilled worker, like an IT guy or someone to fulfill a special role. Is there a limit on those visas that are available?
No, there's no limit. It's not capped. The program isn't capped, and as I said, it's a pretty mainstream option. So, as far as giving information that's helpful to our listeners, I think it really depends on what your circumstances are. Whether you're an individual business person who I think wants to work out a creative way to get to Australia, if that's where you want to end up. If you see business opportunities in Australia, maybe as a regional headquarters for the Asia Pacific, which is often something that we see, in a more stable sort of economy and environment. But whether you're either a business person in that position, or whether you're an employee in a bigger organization that has a branch office in Australia, this same model that we spoke about will in fact work for both.
Perfect.
And it just depends how you structure it. What I always think is a good way to approach this is to basically ask yourself 3 questions. And the first is, what is your goal? So what do you want to achieve? What is your time frame? Is it urgent that it needs to happen yesterday, or can you only realistically do it in 1 or 2 years? And then basically, what are your circumstances? Where are you now? And if you qualify now and your time frame lines up, well, let's do it now. Or if you don't qualify, or for whatever reason your circumstances aren't yet in place, well, then to take those proactive steps to get ready.
Gotcha.
For your circumstances to align to then you make your move.
Gotcha. Earlier you were talking about, I think is it the 585, the National Innovations Visa? Do I have that right?
Yeah, look, that's the replacement.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, in fact, what I suggest is that we do that at a later stage because of the breaking sort of nature of the development of it. So it was only, the National Innovation Visa as a concept was only announced in December last year.
Okay.
And basically how the program is developed is that you need an invitation before you can apply for the visa. And so you need to be nominated by an organization or an individual or a state government. And these state government supports, as I said, New South Wales, where Sydney is, South Australia, they only literally days ago, since the program was announced in December last year, actually gave us guidelines to what they would consider as helpful to identify the right candidates.
Gotcha.
So through New South Wales or South Australia support, there wouldn't have been any candidates yet. I suggest that we just give this a little bit of time just to see if the other states come on board, and then we can have a very helpful discussion, maybe exclusively on that, because that could be a good option as the replacement also for the entrepreneurs which otherwise would have applied under the 188.
So, and just before I move off on that subject, I think it's a good idea. We'll have a follow-up discussion when we have a little bit more detail on how to actually qualify for this National Innovations Visa. But just in general, what is a National Innovations Visa?
Well, look, if you have international recognition as being at the top of your field, whether you're a top musician or sports person or academic, or then a very successful business person, those would be the people that may expect to qualify.
Gotcha. Okay, well, interesting. We'll table that. Let's maybe move on to a different discussion. So we talked about employers. We talked about, people with extraordinary ability or exceptional ability. What about family? I mean, is that a big part of the practice that you guys have, where there's family sponsorship?
Sure. Look, in our practice, because it's specialized in immigration law, we really do the whole spectrum, and within that, there's always a few family visa candidates as well. So the main options within the family skills, or not family skills, within the family stream.
Only a mother-in-law that needs family skills.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway.
And for the record, there is no in-laws visa either, for good reason.
Well, great. We had another discussion with some folks in the Middle East, and there's actually a visa for everybody, including the maid. I mean, and if you have more than one wife, all of them can come. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, that's a different rule. Yeah. So look, the mainstream options that we have in business, in family stream, are obviously the partner. So if you have an Australian partner, and a partner could either be your husband or wife if you are married, or it could be your, what we refer to as a de facto partner, and that's someone that you're in a mutually exclusive relationship with for at least 12 months. Or if you have a registration for that relationship, because it's also possible in many of our state governments to approach the registry for births, deaths and marriages and say, look, as a couple, we would like to register our relationship for de facto relationship purposes. And then it's a matter of completing a few forms, paying some money, and then you're waiting 5 or 6 weeks, and then you are legally recognized as de facto partners. And so if you have an Australian citizen or permanent resident, or even an eligible New Zealand citizen partner, they can sponsor you for a partner visa. So that's a big option. Or then obviously the parent visa for people who have now migrated to Australia, who want to bring their parents across. The parent visa is the way to do it. And there's a child visa. Some of the more interesting options are, for example, the carer visa. So if you, as an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen, have a need for care, or you have a family unit member that has a need for care, then if you can find an overseas relative who's willing to come and offer full-time care, then there's a carer visa for such a situation. There's also something called an age-dependent relative visa. So this is if you have a relative over the pension age, which is basically 67 moving upwards, that you are financially responsible for the last 3 years or a reasonable period, then you can sponsor that aged relative across on an age relative dependent visa. And there's also the last remaining relative visa. So if you literally don't have anyone in your close family except people who live in Australia who are citizens, permanent residents, then you can bring the last one across.
I gotcha.
The lucky lost
The lucky
can get a
lost.
visa
Now,
on that basis.
does that count as nephews or nieces? I mean, if I've got a nephew and niece and I don't have any other family but a nephew in
It has to be,
Australia.
a close relative. So
Okay,
the definition for that's a bit tighter. So
I gotcha. So partners, parents, and siblings.
yes.
Okay, gotcha. Huh. And how long does that process typically take? And is there a cap on how many of those people you can bring over?
Yeah, there is a cap, and as a result, there's a massive queue. So it's insanely long processing. So if you're applying from overseas, I reckon it has to be like a long-term strategy, because so if you're sort of eligible and you want to retire in Australia one day or whatever, then lodge it and then forget about it, and then many years later, maybe you've got your permanent visa. So strategically, if you're eligible to do so, it's probably better to lodge those sort of applications from within Australia, so that you then apply onshore, and when you do, you're granted what's called a bridging visa. And this bridging visa will then keep you lawful in Australia until that new application has been finally determined, however long that process may take.
So hold on a second. That is different and unique from the United States. In other words,
Pretty good.
if you come over as a tourist, your partner or whichever family member, whichever one takes the longest, can sponsor you. If that process takes 20 years, this bridging visa will allow you to remain in Australia until that thing becomes current?
Yeah, until that application has been finally determined. Yeah, so that's right. There's no time frame on a bridging visa.
Now, can you work with a bridging visa?
Now, that's a good question. So the answer is it depends, because the bridging visa that's granted would typically bring across the visa conditions of the visa you held at the time when you lodged this new application. So if you come out on that visit visa that you just mentioned, there'll be a mandatory condition 8101 that says no work, and therefore your bridging visa also will have a no work condition. And it's an expensive country to hang around in for long without being able to work. So unless you have unlimited resources somehow, that will be an issue. So again, there's a lot of strategy that needs to go into planning something of that nature, but that's what we do. So I would recommend someone interested in a strategy to be developed to maybe reach out, to your offices, so that we can have a consultation with them, and that we can, based on their particular circumstances and their time frame and ultimately what their goal is, we can then work out a tailored strategy for them that's going to work.
Yeah, and I would, second that. I think that, that's the unique nature of having a lawyer and a specialized, someone who specializes specifically in immigration, to listen to your facts and take time to come up with a very tailored, specific plan. Because there's so many Facebook professors out there that will say, well, I had a friend who had similar facts and he did it all by himself, and it only took him like 5 months, so why is it that the lawyer is telling you something different? I have clients all the time that will tell me, hey, listen, tell me similar facts that what Bobby has, and I say, well, I represent Bobby. I'm not going to get into his facts, but I can tell you there's something that is different from your facts that obviously ultimately change things. But I think at the end of the day, you may find yourself at a consultation where you may come with the approach of talking about a family-sponsored visa, and maybe ending up with something like a national innovation visa, or something where there may be an employer who may be able to take over a sponsorship that may expedite that process. Again, I think, some of these very specifics that Etienne has talked about, and these are just 3 of the main highlights of Australian immigration, I think get you to that point where you come up with a tailored plan that meets the objectives that you have to ultimately end up either permanently staying in Australia, or just temporarily. Now, Etienne, one of the things that I wanted to just ask, as you were talking about this family visa options, I would assume that it should probably go a little bit faster than for those who are partners of Australian citizens than, as for instance, if I want to sponsor if I'm an Australian citizen, I want to sponsor my mom.
Yeah, not really.
Okay.
Which
one takes the longest?
They do take their time.
Okay.
So I think that the first thing to realize is that if you apply for a partner visa, you obviously have the option to apply from overseas or from within Australia.
And that takes how long, just generally speaking?
Well, potentially 12 months.
Oh,
for sort of a standard no problem case.
Yeah.
But it could easily be 2 years for a more complex matter. So if you apply from overseas, you apply basically for 2 visas. You apply for the provisional and the permanent visa in one go.
Gotcha.
So overseas will be a 309, for provisional, 100 for the permanent visa. If you're in Australia, it's 820, 801. And as we've discussed before, if you're in Australia, when you lodge that, let's say that 820, you'll be granted that bridging visa that we spoke about that will keep you here and that will allow you to sort of continue living with your partner until that case has been finally determined, right? And then the wait wouldn't be as impacting because you'll be together and everyone's happy.
I think that's one of the big, sorry to interrupt, but that's kind of, I think, one of the big things that America lacks. It does not have a bridging visa. You have fiancés, married couples that are sitting on each end of the world waiting on the bureaucracy in America to finally get some kind of an immigration benefit, either a fiancé visa or a permanent or an immigrant visa to come on over. And that could take a year, year and a half. And in the meantime, unless the guy has a tourist visa or some other kind of visa, these families are separated from one another, and especially even if it's a new relationship, I think that's gonna go show for the first test of time. They say separateness makes the heart grow fonder or something along those lines. But needless to say, I mean, I like this bridging visa cap, and that's kind of ties into the earlier comment that I make on how Australia is kind of forward thinking in that way, where they create some solutions for issues like, we don't have a solution for that because the guys are separated until they're done. So this bridging visa is a great option. Can you apply for you cannot apply for a bridging visa outside. You can only apply for a bridging visa once you're in the US, in Australia, right?
Yeah, look, so a bridging visa is not a substantive visa. It's
allows you to stay at least with one another.
A measure. Yeah, it's a legal measure designed to keep you lawful in Australia for a particular purpose. So, for example, if you end up in Australia without a visa, visa's run out, you're an unlawful non-citizen, right? You're subject to detention and removal from Australia. And you say, look, I'm out, I want to go back home, but I want to do it through the airport, not, be forcefully removed. Then you can apply for a bridging visa on departure arrangements. And that's one option. Or if you're in Australia, apply for a new visa, as we said, then you'll get a bridging visa on that basis. Or if you have to take a case on merits review, or if you take a case to court fighting unsuccessful or a negative decision, then those are all events that can allow for you to be
a bridging visa. Interesting. Now, you guys are much closer to China than we are. And the reason why I bring that up is because China has a lot of people. Do you have a lot of Chinese that immigrate to Australia?
Yes, we do. And I also have in my team, we have two team members who speak Mandarin and who can assist our friends from that part of the world.
Yeah.
Historically, a very popular option for applicants from China was the business skills visa.
Gotcha.
Especially because in the business skills visa program that is now passed, there were significant concessions on English language requirement. And so our friends from China who had businesses were very keen to come to Australia that way, because their businesses are typically very easy vehicles in terms of satisfying our criteria to qualify for the visa. And also, if you can't speak English at a functional level, you could still get a business skills visa through that program. So it's unfortunate for those reasons that the business skills program was put to bed, and currently it's a problem if you don't have English language skills, because there are not many options available for you if you don't have some English language skills.
Well, and the reason why I bring it up is because in the US, we have actually, we issue X amount of green cards. And because of sheer population from India, places like India and China, that puts them in a different category so that we can proportionally issue visas or green cards to people, so you don't have an overpopulation of people who are highly populated. Is that something similar that they do in Australia?
We have some of our programs are capped. You've sort of asked that question earlier. So, for example, skilled migration. If we look at the points tested skilled migrant program, they are capped, and they also managed through an invitation program. So for all those reasons that you've pointed out, if the government feels we've got too many cooks, then they simply won't invite you as an applicant who's trained as a cook. But if we need more IT professionals and you're an IT professional, well, then they'll invite you to apply. So they can certainly manage it in that way, but it's not for all programs. It's certainly, as I mentioned, skill migration, but also for that 858 that we mentioned earlier. That's also going to be invitation only.
But I mean, it's not, your cap is not discriminatory based upon where the person is from. Over here in the US, it's discriminatory on that basis only because of the sheer number of applicants from there, right?
Yeah, no, I can say that we don't have any such.
Interesting.
Yeah, I almost used the word discrimination, but I didn't.
I mean, yeah. All right. Well, let me ask you just then, we'll kind of wrap this up. We talked a little bit about the business migration via employer, which, as you say, that the 188 is that kind of yesterday's news. Are they going to replace that with anything different? Or is the innovation visa take over?
Yeah, within the National Innovation Visa, under the entrepreneurship stream, it's clear that they're going to say, look, if you're a very successful business person, and you can show your business acumen through results that you've historically been able to achieve by growing a great business or making a lot of money, that could be the basis on which you then try and get access to the 858 visa down the track. And I think for those applications, they're probably going to ask for state government support. And this is where the very newly published New South Wales guideline sort of gives us some hints to the caliber of person that they would consider supporting. But I think historically, in presenting your case to the government, which was also an invitation-based program, if you had a good lawyer presenting a strong profile in terms of your business achievements and your business acumen that you'll bring to Australia, you got invited because it's on paper it looked awesome, right? Where I think the new visa will be a lot stricter in terms of their vetting process, and what New South Wales, for example, has indicated is that if they get an application and they sort of consider that there's merit in that case, that they'll then refer it to third-party independent assessing to agree that they really are top people. It's not only smoke and mirrors, if you like.
Sure, exactly.
And only after that vetting process will they officially nominate you on Form 1000, and that will be very helpful, obviously, in expecting to get that invitation from the federal government to apply for the visa. So I think that's how it's going to work. It's just, it's all very new at this point.
So 3 questions. I'm sure you get these questions too. Number 1, how long is it going to take? Number 2, how much is it going to cost? Right? And number 3, what's the likelihood of success?
Sure.
We kind of usually, each case, I will speak on our end, each case is obviously unique. We do our fees on a cap basis. So, we've done these visas over and over again. We don't have as much change, which I wish that we did, as much as Australia has, and as robust as the Australian immigration system is, we're still dealing with laws that are on the book from the 90s. So, we usually do our cases on a cap basis. So there's a great degree of certainty as to how much this is going to cost. As far as timing is concerned, we have some guidance from the government pertaining to each particular visa category on how long the government takes on to adjudicate it, which I say that because I need to remind people that, once I hand it to the government, it's in their hands. And last but not least, we take on cases that we feel very confident that we can win and achieve. And I want to pass it on to you and kind of just ask you, do you have a range? I know it's difficult to say of what these employment-based visas typically cost.
Yeah, look, it's very similar. Our practice is very similar in that respect, that we have fixed fees. So I think that is the way forward, for the legal profession as well, because historically you had this massive hourly rate and you give a sort of a loose estimate, and then you keep getting bills every month for the work in progress. And when I established the practice in Sydney back in 2006, one of the goals that I had from day one is we have fixed rates, so that clients know exactly what it's going to cost, and full disclosure up front. I mean, you're gonna have to pay it anyway, so there's no point of being a surprise. Exactly. Not a good surprise, right? So. Yeah, for full disclosure up front, as you say, you have a very good idea of the amount of work that will be required, so you can very accurately, based on earlier matters, give those fees across. And the government fees are what they are. They're quite expensive in Australia. So, but then again,
what was the filing fees? Just ballpark range. I mean,
Australian dollar is also not as strong as the mighty American dollar. So there's a big discount straight away. If we look at employer-sponsored type cases, as I said, those 3 applications that need to be filed with government. If we look, for example, at the nomination stage, there's something called a Skill Australia Fund training levy, and that is calculated based on the turnover in the business doing the sponsorship. So if the turnover is below $10 million per year, then the training levy is $1,200 for every year of nomination. So if there's a 4-year visa at $1,200 per year, it's a $4,800 sunken cost for the training levy in its own right. And then there's a filing fee that's $330. That's not a big deal. If we look at the visa charges, so for a temporary work visa, per adult applicant, it's just over $3,000, $3,150. So again, if it's a family of 2 adults and 3 children, we're looking at $8-9 grand just for the visa government filing fees. That gives you a 1 to 4 year temporary visa. So that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say it's an expensive process. But within the context of other applications, let's say you apply for a partner visa, the filing fees just over 9,000, I think it's $9,100 or something like that. But then you apply for both the provisional and the permanent visa
At the same time.
one go. So that's really, it gives you that permanent result at the end, as long as the relationship remains.
It's very important. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Etienne, look, this has been very insightful. We are going to tee up the National Innovations Visa, because it sounds to me like that's the next best thing to happen in Australia. Very curious to understand on how that intricacies worked, to parallel it with regards to the processes we've got here in the United States. Hopefully, at some point this year, we may have some discussion about changes in immigration law in the US. I'm not holding my breath. There has been obviously quite a lot of shuffling going on, literally and figuratively. But thank you so much for your time here with us today. I am hopeful that those listeners have been able to find some good insight with some of these three options that you have provided. I want to remind those who are listening that you can contact us as info@versfeldimmigration.com. We'll send that information to you. Again, those of you who have registered, you will get a follow-up email after this, and then we'll put you in touch with Etienne in his office. We're going to do an assessment with you to find out the best possible plan for you, come up with a tailored plan, and then with a timeline and cost as far as that's concerned. Etienne, any final words from your end?
Look, I think it was a good session in terms of covering some of the options we have. There was reference to the resident return visa, which we actually didn't get to speak about. And that's something we can maybe then also push back to that other session to follow.
Yes.
But basically just to resurrect your access rights to Australia if you've previously been granted a visa, a permanent visa, and you haven't been here for many years. That's a good way to get that back in a relatively short time frame without going through all the hoops again. So that's why I thought that would be a good one. It's been a pleasure to make myself available, and wherever you are based, feel free to reach out so that we can help you.
Thank you, Etienne. Thank you for those of you who've joined us. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Take care.